Hi everyone, how are you today? Thank you so much for joining me. If you are new here, my name is Donna and it is lovely to have you here this morning. So today I fancy having a go at using some of these distress paints. I went for the neutral colours. Obviously I do quite neutral coloured things. I've got old paper, pumice stone, two of my favourite colours. Brushed corduroy, which I've never used, gathered twigs, which is a lovely colour, I have that in an ink, and ground espresso. And you all know, if you've watched me for a while, the ground espresso in the oxide is my all-time favourite colour to ink with. So these are the ones I'm going to be playing with today. I have also cut up some sketch paper. This is 130 GSM, so thicker than your average copy paper, but not overly thick. And I also have cut up some watercolour paper. This is 300 GSM, so quite a lot thicker than the other. And I'm no expert in this whatsoever, so I'm just going to have a go and see what I come up with, see what techniques work. I quite fancy the idea of maybe doing some emboss resist and using some embossing glazes and other things like that to kind of see what outcomes I can get. So this may not be perfect at all. In fact, I'm thinking it won't be perfect. I'm just having a play. So I'm just going to get started. To begin with, I'm just going to do a simple like smush, like we would do with the ink, but I'm going to use the paint instead. Now, from what I know from this paint, you have to give it a really good shake, and you should be able to hear like the mixing bowl. I also remember Tim Holtz saying this is water reactive, so you can move it around and do some techniques while it's wet. And apparently as well, the viscosity of every colour is different because the formula for every colour is different. So that's also something apparently to bear in mind. So I'm going to put a little bit of the gathered twigs here. And I'm not going to add any water yet. I'm just going to put my paper on because I'm hoping that will give me the blobs. I quite like darker bits and lighter bits. So I'm just going to put this on. Now this paint is quite watery anyway, so you probably will get quite a bit of movement from it. So I'm going to do that. Now I'm going to add some water to mix it up a little bit. And that's then you start to get these darker bits and lighter bits. This is what I saw Tim Holtz do, and I really liked the way he did it. Can you see the darker splodges with the lighter bits? And I actually really like that look. Not everybody does. I do. Not everybody likes the dark colour around the outside either, but I always have liked that. So I'm just going to pick that colour up there like that. I'm going to put that to one side. I'm going to do the same now with this, just picking that up. And again, all I'm doing is trialing things out, seeing how they look. I'm not trying to be neat or perfect. So that's just taken that colour up there. And again, it's, you know, this is just kind of what we do with the inks really, isn't it? I'm going to wipe that off because I want to put some more little blobs down. This paint comes out really nicely and controlled. Just going to smush that around. And then what you can also do is do this because it will react. And just help the paint move around a little bit like that. And as it starts to layer, you get all this lovely texture and pattern and lovely things happening. I don't like this line, so I'm just going to try and do that like that. Okay, and let me just going to put that down to pick that colour up there. What I'm going to try and do is put some water in here, get a little paintbrush, and see if I can do any water flicks. Oh, you can see it more on this dark colour. It's my lovely thumbprint. And you can just see it. I hope you can see it. I don't want to pick it up because I don't want it to move, but can you just see those little water marks? Couldn't really see it on this one. Okay, so I'm going to leave those to one side. This is what the first one's looking like. It's looking nice. Love those dark bits. I'm just going to move it around slightly to try and move this paint. Now that I'm using this, I'm realising that the watercolour paper is much better, which I did expect, but I don't always like to use a thick paper because I don't want to always add too much bulk. So that is those. I'm going to pop those to one side. I'm going to bring in another colour. So that was Gathered Twigs. I'm going to bring in the Ground Espresso. And this time I'm going to put the water on here. And I'm just going to fill in the gaps on this piece of paper. Now again, this isn't much different to what I would do with the inks. It's just a different way, I suppose, of doing something. Let's pop that down. It's a different medium. If you're into mixed media, these are a good option because they are much more fluid. And I think they respond well to your heat gun. So, you know, like sometimes acrylic can blister and spoil. Apparently these don't. I've never used a heat tool on them, but apparently Tim Holtz did formulate them so that they could be used in a mixed media capacity without spoiling. This thicker paper is really lovely because look at that. I absolutely love that. It's like that effect when you do coffee dyeing and then you sprinkle some coffee grains on. This watercolour paper is really good at just soaking up the colour. So again, that's that one. Now I am actually going to dry that one off because I do want to add another colour on top. It's dried like a dream. Look how dark that brown has come out. Love that so much. So Tim Holtz, when I was watching, said once it's dry, it's permanent. So if you were to flick water on it, it's not going to react. So let's just test it. Yeah, it's not reacting. It's just sitting on the surface. So there we go. Tim, believe you. So I want a contrasting colour. I'm going to do this old paper. Going to use the watercolour. This, now it's dried, this is the sketch paper, the 130 GSM. Once it's dried, it's actually quite substantial. It stops being as floppy. If that goes under something heavy, I think that would be fine. It's just a little bit more difficult whilst you're trying to work with it. I'm wondering if this paint does the same thing as the oxide. The oxide turns blue. It'd be interesting to see what this looks like. See, if you compare this, it looks a lot greyer as a paint in this bottle to, let me show you. This is the old paint here. The old paper, sorry. Can you see the difference? It looks a lot more green here than what it does there. It's much more grey based in the paint. This oxide turns blue. It's a gorgeous colour. So let's just see what happens with this paint. I'm just going to do the one bit for now. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to mix it. Actually, let's mix it because let's not have the darker bit. So let's just mix it round for now. Dry that off later. I don't want to cover this, but it's coming out very light, almost white. That's interesting. It's a completely different colour to the oxide. Okay, so that's what that looks like. Let's pop it onto here. You can see it a bit more in there. It is definitely a lot whiter in this medium. Okay, I'm going to dry those off because I'm going to try next doing the same colour but without adding the water, just to see how that reacts. So let's dry this off. The difference in that colour is quite bizarre to me. So you can see it more clearly on here. So that's the old paper. Going to put a few drops on. Oops. No water. Maybe one spritz just to, you know, just to get it going. So that's lightened it now. This would be a nice colour if you wanted to lighten whatever it is you were doing. I want to try and bring some of this dark back, so I'm just going to do a few more blobs of the ground espresso. And just pick it up. Add some water. Just see it now dispersing from where I initially had those blobs. I like that. I like those dark blobs. That's interesting. That looks like a tree to me. So that is that. Where's this other one? Let's just pop this down. Try and pick some of that colour up. Put that to one side, and I'm just going to use a couple of smaller pieces. Can you see there where I've left the blobs? It's created those circles. That's what I was looking for. I'm going to let that do its thing. Pick the colour up on here. So that's that one. That's that one. Let's just get this dry. So I have this chevron stencil and just a sponge. It's just a cheap bath sponge that I've cut up. And I want to stencil onto here. So what I'm actually going to do is use my acrylic block and to hold the stencil down because this is starting to warp. So again, I'm not looking for perfection, but I am going to keep the paint as dry as I can. So I will pop a little bit of the paint over the top. Let's use pumice stone. And my idea is I'm just going to pick out areas to stencil, and then I'm going to remove it with a wet cloth. Or remove some of it with a wet cloth. Let's pop a bit of paint. Oh, hang on, I've got this here, haven't I? So let's pop that there. I'm only going to put that for now, which I know seems ridiculous, but I don't know how well this is going to stamp. Oh, actually it's stamping quite well. It does help for it to be dry. So I could probably do a little bit more than that. I'm not doing it perfect or neatly. I'm just getting the colour on. Just going to see what happens. I'm just holding down the stencil on the bits where I'm applying the paint, just to prevent it going under the stencil. Then with a cloth, a wet cloth, where's it gone? I'm going to try and take some of this paint away. Just going over some areas, but not all. Now, I think having a bigger contrast would be better for this, but I'm thinking, would it leave a nice kind of, you know, would it leave this pattern, this chevron pattern, and that, because I haven't used much paint, is starting to dry already. So just taking bits of it off. Let's just see what happens. Okay. So you can definitely see some darker bits and some lighter bits. I have perhaps used a little bit more paint there. But yeah, it's kind of happened. Kind of worked. Not perfect, but again, as you build layers, it doesn't really matter because everything will build on top of each other anyway. It's my favourite way to work. So next, I think I will dry off and try some heat embossing and see if the paint resists the embossing powder. The ink set I have decided to use is this silicone clear stamp by Glowland, and lots of different abstract circles. I just thought this would be interesting since we have the circles going on here. Going to start with the larger stamp and the larger stamping block. I think I will do this one. Now, I don't have a stamping platform. I just do stamping my own way. Just straight onto paper. I'm going to use, this is a really old one, embossing stamp pad by Doug Crafts. It's dirty. It's probably dried out quite a bit. So, you know, I'm working with what I've got here. So I'm going to use that. I've got the Vintage Photo Distress Glaze. I've also got embossing powder in potting soil, which might be a nice one to try. And this is embossing powder from Sizzix in, trying to find the colour. Gunmetal, I think. Yes, gunmetal. And then I've got this one from Doug Crafts as well, which I don't tend to use because it's Tinsel Snowflake and I can't stand glitter. But it's a good winter one. So I might do something dark in the back, a bit lighter in the front, and then perhaps pop some more ink over in the hopes that, not ink, sorry, paint, in the hopes that it will resist anywhere where I've got the glaze. So the first thing to do is to, now obviously as well, without a stamping block, you can only print once. You can't lift it up ink again and put it back down. So it's first go really. I don't mind texture. I just quite like things not looking perfect. But I am going to give it a really good press, because I do want as much as that embossing ink to transfer as possible. Pop that on there. And try and remember where I put, oops, the ink. Oh, it's stuck already, so I don't think that was too bad of a job. That is gorgeous. It's just almost pitch black. Knock that off. I might just go over one more time just in case I've missed anywhere. Lovely. And then before I do anything else, I'm popping that back into there, because I do not want this to go everywhere. So let's funnel this back in. I'm going to do another one. That can just stay off to the side. Just get that a wipe. I'm going to do a slightly smaller one in the same colour. So before I heat it, I'm going to stamp again. I have a lot on my desk. I am trying to keep everything in shot. I apologise if I've at any time gone off camera. Let's do that about there. I'm hoping it doesn't take off any of this. Some more of this. Bit more to be safe. I'm going to continue with this same colour, decreasing in the size of my circles every time. So I am liking this so far. I'm hoping that you can pick up the shine from that embossing glaze. What I like about it is where there is this the chevron pattern. Obviously we get these more dark dense areas, and where there's no pattern at all we get this lighter area coming through. So you can still see that chevron shape. You can also see the different shapes on the stamp. So like this one, for example, I'm hoping I'm not too close. It's got a diamond pattern in it. What I'm going to do is continue to build those layers up using different colours. So I've started quite dark with the black, and I think I might move to potting soil and carry on going down the sides of those stamps. And finally, I may do some of the glaze with some tiny ones just on the top, and then we'll see how that's looking. But so far, so good. So this is how this one is looking. You can't see it as clearly with the colour being closer to the background colour, but you can definitely see the shine. I love where it's overlapped. I do feel like I've got some areas where I've got slightly too much ink. Obviously, like I said, I'm not using a stamping platform. This doesn't actually bother me. If I was doing a card, perhaps it would, you know, if I wanted to be a little bit more precise. But for this type of thing, I'm fine with that. So I am next going to do a little bit of the Vintage Photo glaze, but I think I'm going to switch from doing circles. What I might do is try the water technique where you put a bit of water on and then the glaze sticks to the water. Getting that ready on there. And to get my glaze ready. Now, I don't know if glaze is the best way to do this or the best one to do this with, because I find the glaze a lot more difficult to work with than normal embossing powders. I don't know why. I'm gonna let that sit on there while I do a few other areas. So the idea is that obviously wherever I put the water, the glaze will stick to it. Again, I'm experimenting. This might go horribly wrong, but that's okay. And moment of truth. Yeah, I mean, it's on there, isn't it? This time I may do some splats. I think it's handy using water which is slightly coloured, so I have a little bit of paint on mine, mixed into mine, and it just means you can see where you've put the water. I'm going to heat it, I'm going to see what that looks like. So this is dried and it looks like caramel. Looks like melted caramel. This is looking very cool. I like this a lot, but I did want to see if the paint would resist where I've embossed. So I'm going to let it cool just a little bit, and then I think I'm going to use the brush corduroy. I don't want too much of this. It's not the darkest. But I don't want to go too dark because I still want to be able to see some of these different colours. So I don't want to overwhelm it with colour. I'm going to kind of add it right here. And it's such a light colour that I may not get much of a... Oh, it's working. Can you see how it's resisting the bit where it's embossed? Interesting. Let me have another look. Let me put some down here. Yeah, and it's running off where that embossing is. I'm going to dry that off, and just where I've embossed, I'm just going to go over and remove any wet paint that's still on there. That will just come off there then. I'm going to add in some of the ground espresso, of course, because I want to see if it gives a bigger contrast. Might just mix that in a tiny bit so that I'm getting like a tonal effect. And a little bit of water. And I want some dark here. No, I want some dark around here, so let's see. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's add some more. Now, I don't know how much of that has now lost the chevron, but again, I'm just experimenting with this. I've no idea what's going to happen. I'm just having a go to see how these things react. I'm going to get that dried. What I'm going to do before it's completely dry is get some tissue and just dab any excess water off in the hopes it doesn't get too dark. Now, unfortunately, I have dried too much. I let it dry too much over some of the circles, but we can still see a lot. And I'm actually really liking the unruliness of this. See, I use things like this as backgrounds mainly. So it will be a background for a tag or a background for a journal card or a mixed media piece. So I actually really like all of these different textures and things that you get. I next want to get my brayer, roll it in the ink and use some of this white stuff, and I just want to see what that looks like. And then I think I've probably faffed about enough with that. Just a tiny bit on here. I'm just going to see if I can pick up some of that ink. Again, just having a play, just going to put the whole lot. Now, I am incredibly brave doing this. I hate glitter, but I want to have a go. Just see what's happened, you know, see what happens. So I'm just going to go everywhere with this. I mean, I may have picked none of it up. You know, I may not have had enough of anything on that brayer. I'm expecting to be covered in glitter now for the next month. Let's get it heated. Let's have a look what it looks like. I actually really like the way that that's picked up some of the texture from the embossing earlier. So that's how that's looking. Now, if I was obviously to do this again and it wasn't the first time using these mediums, I would be a little bit more controlled in what I was doing. I've obviously thrown a lot at this, but if you were to cut this up into smaller sections and use some different ephemera on top of it, you know, it's just really interesting to see all this different texture coming through and the different colours. I've removed anything to do with glitter from the vicinity. As I thought, it's got everywhere, like it always does. What is it with glitter? It just loves to make its mark, doesn't it? Yeah, so what I'm going to do next is pop a stencil onto here with a clean sponge. Again, this is a complete experiment. I'm just messing around, just seeing what happens. I'm hoping, let's just fasten that down. I'm hoping that I can stamp some of the ink through the stencil and then emboss it and then do the paint afterwards. So let's have a go. I suppose I could do this, couldn't I? But I don't want to lift the stencil up like that and risk spoiling it. So perhaps if I just kind of drag it like this. And again, I'm being quite sporadic. I'm not really worrying where I'm putting. It is going sticky, so I do think I'm getting something. I'm not worrying too much about getting it all covered. I quite like it when it's not all covered. Take the stencil off. And I want to use the black again because then I want to use this either pumice stone or the old paper on top, and I think that would give a really nice contrast. Right, so the black's here. Let's put that on like that. And I'm hoping that I've been able to transfer a good enough amount of this ink to at least pick up some of the embossing powder. It looks like I'm going to be using the whole tub. That's okay. Pick it up. Oh, that's what we're left with, which I am happy with. I like that it's slightly patchy. I don't know what happened here. That was maybe my thumb. But on the whole, I'm liking that. Let's get this heated. This is all embossed and dried. And the next thing I want to do is take some... I think I will go for pumice stone because this one I think will just look white. And I want to see if I can make a resist with this embossing. I don't know how successful it's going to be because I was pushing the embossing ink through the stencil. I've obviously not got a very thick layer of the embossing powder, but I think if I was to go maybe one drop and then lots of water, that might help. I'm going to mix that up so I don't get any kind of large clumps of colour. I'm going to add a little bit more. Make it quite watery. I'm going to pop the panel on. Oops, smush it round a bit. As you can see, it's not that dark. It's dark enough to give a contrast. I didn't want to leave the paint too thick because I wanted to be able to still see. But you can see compared to the white, there is a contrast there. And it has resisted. Oops. It has resisted, so what I might do is just come in very quickly, just with a wet towel. And then I'm going to dry this and then see what that looks like. There's just a very subtle difference. I'm going to reuse this again. Put some more over the top in the hopes to build up the colour. Just let it run where it wants to run. And I'm going to dry that off. And around the outside, I think it might be nice to bring in some of the darker colour. So I've got these two. I think the gathered twigs would give more of a contrast. I'm not going to do as much spritzing because I do want a darker colour. I don't want it quite so light and I don't want it quite so runny. And I'm going to concentrate in the corners this time. So I'm just going to pick a little bit up. And you can see there where it's the embossing is resisting the ink. I'll let it run down a little bit. It's quite an interesting effect. Bit of water to help it on its way. Just going to let it drip off. I'm going to go back this way. And where it looks like some of the ink is just sticking slightly to that powder, just going to remove it. It's just where I haven't got a large area of that powder. but I just want it to be a little bit clearer. You can even dab like that once it starts to get a little bit more solid. Oops. And dab it off like this. So it's a resist, you know, it doesn't avoid it altogether, but it resists it. And I'm going to dry that off. And going back in now with a brush and a tiny bit of the ground espresso, I'm going to do some flicks and see how that mixes. Look at that. Again, I'm just going to pat off anywhere where it's got a little bit dark over the embossing glaze. And I just want to leave that to sit. I don't want to dry that off because I want to see what it does in its own time. And while it's wet, a tiny, tiny bit of this Vintage Photo glaze. This one I like. It's got a slight shimmer from that, and hopefully you can see it from the glaze. We've got our stripes, our embossed stripes, and we've got our paint colours and our paint splodges. So I think that would make a really lovely background to build up from. We've got texture, variety of colours. So this is what I've come up with so far today. It looks like there's not a lot here. However, it has actually taken a good hour and a half, because obviously you're stamping, you're drying it off, trying different things, and it does actually take a while. And I've just realised how long I've actually been filming for. So I think I am going to do a part 2. So this was the first one that I did. And again, I threw a lot of different things at it, but like I was saying, I can cut that up. So what I was looking at was this here. To me, that looks like a star, and it looks like almost like twinkles from the star. So if I cut that there, like that, that is a lovely base to a tag, a winter tag. I could use it for my winter blues kit that's coming up. So just by looking at these pieces of paper in different sections, you can really get a sense of how they can be used. And again, if you just do that, you've just got a lovely textured tag or background. So even though it looks a bit of a mismatch on here and maybe a bit of a hot mess, it's actually great to just have a go, see what happens, because you can always do something with them. By the time it got to this one, I feel like I've mastered the paint a little bit more. And I think now, having had a go with everything on there, been a bit more controlled on here, I'm going to do the part 2 with some different techniques, where I just maybe try one technique per watercolour base. So that is what I will do. I'm going to go and have a look at some Tim Holtz demonstrations as well and see what he does with the paints. As I said, I'm no expert on this whatsoever. I was literally just having a play, but I'm glad I did, and I'm looking forward to trying some more things out. So I will see you in the next part. Take care. Bye.